You know, there are two things that society says that you should never talk about within the bounds of polite conversation. One of those is politics, and the other is religion. However, now that we're here in the second decade of the 21st century, we can finally add a third one to that list. I am talking, of course, about Bigfoot. Yeah, Bigfoot. Bigfoot. You should never talk about Bigfoot in the course of polite conversation. And I can already hear some of you recoiling after hearing me say that, but I'm going to try to convince you in this video of why you should never talk about Bigfoot in polite conversation. Now, if this is your first video of mine that you're watching, I just want to give you a quick introduction to who I am and my background in the subject. Um, my name's Nate, by the way, and back when I was in my late teens into my early 20s, I was into the whole Bigfoot subject, and I dove down the rabbit hole, so to speak, and I came out the other side of it completely disenfranchised by the entire subject matter. And I've come to the conclusion that the whole Bigfoot subject is a crowded field full of charlatans and grifters, and that's just my overall opinion in the matter. I know that some of you are going to beg to differ, and that's fine. But let's just kick this one off. So when it comes to politics, right, it's understandable that you shouldn't bring that up in polite conversation because politics is not a one-size-fits-all subject matter, right? Different people have different worldviews, and those worldviews are going to be diametrically opposed to each other in certain instances. And it's not something that you should talk about in polite conversation because it is an incredibly touchy subject, and you can easily make enemies for obvious reasons, right? When your worldviews and beliefs are diametrically opposed, there's really not much common ground you can go off of after that. Same with religion. You're dealing with the potential eternal damnation of the guy you're talking to who believes something else, right? So that's also something that you don't want to talk about because, hey, if that guy believes something else, something different, you don't want to make him think that you think that he's going to go to hell when he dies, right? So it's completely understandable why you wouldn't want to talk about religion with somebody. And then as for Bigfoot, does anybody out there have an answer for me as to why you can't talk about Bigfoot without it being a touchy subject? Let's say that you believe one way about Bigfoot and you're talking with a person who believes whatever the opposite is of what you believe. What are the stakes in that? At the end of the day, Bigfoot is an alleged bipedal hairy ape that's wandering around through the forests of North America and maybe elsewhere. And beyond that, that's all it is, right? And yet, if I make a YouTube video explaining my position on the matter, why I think that it is a hoax, the biggest hoax of the 20th century, I'm going to get dogpiled by Bigfoot people. And I don't want to just talk about the lay people here. I'm talking about mostly, well, let me backtrack a little bit, actually. So it's understandable why you might be a little defensive about somebody calling the subject matter that you believe in as a hoax, right? It's understandable, especially if you're monetizing it. Let's say you have a YouTube channel, where you draw little 2D lines over the Patterson-Gimlin film, and you try to, convince other people as to what, the Patterson-Gimlin film's authenticity and that sort of thing. And maybe you sell Merchandise. Maybe you have a YouTube call-in show or a podcast where people give you money for running it, right? Maybe you sell bags of coffee with Bigfoot logos on it, with really crappy coffee, and you charge 5 times the price it should be, but because it has a little Bigfoot logo on it, you really price gouge it, right? It's understandable why you might be defensive. But for the average person, just the lay person who believes in Bigfoot and consumes Bigfoot content, for the life of me, I cannot understand why so many of these people are so emotionally invested in the subject. Because at the end of the day, it's a bipedal ape. How does the existence of a bipedal ape in the woods improve the conditions of your life? Or how does it make your life any better or worse if it's real or if it's not real? This is why I don't understand why this is why I don't understand why so many people are so emotionally invested in the subject matter. It makes zero sense to me. So if I make a video explaining why I think it's fantasy, and I explain why, and if I try to give my reasoning to these people, I feel like it's like trying to force feed steak to a baby, right? His body is just not going to accept it, and he's going to reject it, right? So they're not receptive to any thought or any contrary worldview that does not align with, Bigfoot is out there in the woods, and for some reason, you don't get these same types of people with, like, for example, ghost hunters or something like that. You don't, for the most part, you don't get these people who are going to attack you if you don't believe in whatever they believe, right? But for some reason, Bigfoot is such a touchy subject now, and I think it's because there are a lot of people out there now who have built entire business industries around the subject, and they're trying to circle the wagons and protect it and trying to recruit new people into the subject matter. And I think that's the best explanation I can come up with, because it doesn't make sense to me otherwise. So why is it so important that this creature exists to so many people? I will just never fully understand. The best I can come up with is that people's livelihoods are tied to this. People's egos are tied to it as well. It's like if I explain why the like Thinker Thunker and Bill Munn's methodologies for measuring out the subject in the Patterson-Gimlin films, completely flawed, right? The methodology they use is completely flawed. And if I point this out to them and I say, hey, you can't just draw a 2D line over the subject matter or the subject's arms and legs and call that a valid measurement, because it's a 2D line and you're not taking into consideration the camera angle, the lens size of the camera, or the distance between the camera and the subject. You can't just do that and call it a valid measurement. What they'll often do is they'll just leapfrog over that argument. It'll just go right over their head, and they'll come up with some other excuse. They'll say, like, hey, if you don't believe in Bigfoot, why don't you say that to a Native American? As if Native Americans are this monolithic block of people that all believe the same thing, right? So anyway, I don't understand why Bigfoot is now in the same category as politics and religion. Will somebody let me know, please? Thanks.